Hello, welcome to a windy episode of Forgotten Cemeteries Pacific Northwest. Today we're at Gervais Pioneer Masonic Cemetery, located in Gervais, Oregon, Marion County. No alternative names, but there is a Sacred Heart Cemetery just across the street if you visit. So let's go meet some of the local residents and hear their story. A little history about this cemetery. Has an establishment date of 1875. There's 100 to 500 burials per the Oregon Burial Site Guide. Finder Grave shows about 375 memorials added so far. It is on the Theodore C. Pujade donation land claim. Ooh, that's a tough name. Appears that individual is buried in Salt Lake City, so it didn't hang around Oregon that long. A lot of Russian burials here as well. As far as the town of Gervais, it is named after Joseph, a very early Oregon pioneer and early resident on French Prairie. Joseph came to Oregon in 1811 with the hunt party of the Astor Enterprise, and he specialized in trappening for the company, so he's sort of like a contractor. The French Prairie was located in what is now Marion County, Oregon, named after the earlier settlers who were former employees of the Hudson Bay Company. This goes all the way back to 1812, so very old country out here. Fast forward in history, Neil Johnston allegedly named the town Gervais. Close to this area is Champouille, the site of the first provisional government in Oregon. Joseph was actually one of the individuals that voted for the provisional government. Today we learn about some pretty graphic Civil War stories, so be aware. It's a little gruesome and disturbing. We'll learn about yet another pro-Confederate guerrilla war leader named Bloody Bill and his reign of extreme terror in Missouri during the Civil War. We'll also discover a rare symbol found on a headstone, if I can find it. And our visit includes hearing the story of the largest civil and racial riot in U.S. history, driven by Irishman gangs, such as the Dead Rabbits in 1863. And our first stop is the headstone of Isaac Newton Blanc, born in New York in 1828. A note mentioned he was documented in the Civil War draft registration in 1863. I did find an Isaac Blanc that served in the 6th Regiment of New York Heavy Artillery, assuming that's him, which makes sense because in 1863 we had the famous New York draft riots during the Civil War. So in June of 1863, the Enrollment Act hit. Men between 20 and 45 years of age, I'm eligible, must enroll in the program to set up the draft system. Irishmen in the city of New York, they didn't like this, and protest and riot they did. At first they were angry at the wealthy man who could afford to pay a fee of $300 to have a substitute take their place in the war if they were drafted. It seems logical, and rightfully so, they would be angry about that. However, things grew violent when Irish American workers turned their focus towards African Americans. It then turned into an inner-city civil war at that point. Their gripe was that free African Americans were paid more than them, so they could afford to pay the Civil War draft substitution fee as well. Irish American workers rioted, destroying several public buildings, Protestant churches, black homes, and even going after Colored Orphan Asylum at one point, burning it down. It got to the point where black residents just left Manhattan. They just did not feel safe anymore, and they left the area for good and went to Brooklyn. This got incredibly violent even more, and I'm going to read an article from the Buffalo Express newspaper. As the dock areas in New York, this is like the hot spots. This is where the worst violence happened. Article reads, west of Broadway, below 26, all was quiet at 9 o'clock last night. A crowd was at the corner of 7th Avenue and 27th Street at the time. This was the scene of a hanging of an African American in the morning and another at 6 o'clock in the evening. The body of one hung in the morning presented a shocking appearance at the station house. His fingers and toes had been sliced off, and there was scarcely an inch of flesh which was not gashed. Late in the afternoon, an African American was dragged out of his house in West 27th Street, beaten down on the sidewalk, pounded in a horrible manner, and then hanged from a tree. End of article. Overall, 11 black men were hanged during these riots. Among those murdered was a 7-year-old child. Not only were blacks targeted, but anyone who was in support of civil rights in the city. Abigail Gibbons, a well-known abolitionist at the time, had her house targeted and the rioters burned it down. 2 white women who were married to black men got attacked. In addition, a white prostitute who catered to black men got attacked. So everyone was guilty and being targeted now. To add, the New York State militia couldn't be utilized as they were assisting the Union Army in Gettysburg at the time. Police forces gave it a go, but they got absolutely wrecked in the fight. The New York Times building was targeted next, but apparently the journalists were equipped with Gatling guns and fought off the rioters. Finally, on July 16, 1863, the militia returned to New York and got some order. One final battle took place at Gramercy Park in New York, where various Irish gangs would go up against federal troops. Notable gangs include the Pug Uglies from Baltimore, the Dead Rabbits from the Lower Manhattan, Their battle symbol included a dead rabbit on a pike. The bloody tubs, who were known to dunk their political opponents into slaughterhouse tubs. And finally, the Rip Raps. The riots are considered the largest civil and racially charged urban disturbance in U.S. history. And here is the final resting place of John Wesley Thornbury Sr. Even though this is on the Theodore Pajade donation land claim, this area, who was not buried in Oregon but Utah, the land for the cemetery was donated by John here. Even has the headstone to prove it. It says it on there. Sarah's story is a bit of a rocky one. You see her on the right. Her mom died in 1852. Couldn't find out why, but her mother's final resting place is in Illinois at Codell Cemetery. This is the cemetery picture from Find a Grave. A little rough looking. However, her father would remarry Lucretia Ashlock. They would be living in Missouri during the early 1860s, and there was a lot of division in that state during this time. It wasn't ideal, as both Union and Confederate forces occupied the state, and neighbor versus neighbor was a common thing, with interstate scuffles taking place. A clash of ideologies overall, as Missouri was a slave state. And we've talked about this in previous cemetery visits, but the rise of the bushwhacker pro-Confederate groups is heavily tied to Missouri. Their guerrilla tactics overall devastated the state of Missouri during the Civil War. The famous attacks include the Lawrence Massacre, where 150 unarmed men and boys were killed by the bushwhackers. Sarah's family would escape to Iowa during this chaos and make their way to Oregon in 1865, luckily. Another dark piece of Missouri massacre history took place in 1864. A bushwhacker leader named William T. Anderson, aka Bloody Bill, led a group of 80 mounted pro-Confederate soldiers to Missouri. Bloody Bill utilized U.S. Army blue uniforms to disguise his crew as allies to the town. They would approach a train with 125 passengers on board, 24 of them being Union soldiers, and sadly the train engineer was late in realizing it was all a trick. Bloody Bill and his crew took over the train. The pro-Confederates ordered the Union soldiers to remove their uniforms. Sergeant Thomas Goodman would step forward, expecting himself to be sacrificed and shot to save the soldiers. Bloody Bill would ignore this, and so would his crew, and proceeded to murder the 24 soldiers, mutilating and scalping them. Goodman reported that massacre that his soldiers faced death to meet cruelty by sublimity, and in the presence of devils that die like gods. They would take Goodman prisoner for a big prisoner exchange, I guess that was their hope, and set fire to the train, sending it down the tracks. Goodman would witness firsthand just how brutal Bloody Bill was yet again. During the Battle of Centralia, the pro-Confederates overwhelmed Union forces and promised humane treatment. 'Twas a lie. Around 120 Union soldiers were killed, some decapitated, some tortured to death. Goodman reported the slayings were even worse than the train massacre. Luckily, during one night of confusion, Goodman managed to escape and made it to a federal prison to tell his story. Goodman did survive the war and died in 1886. He's buried in California. Anderson's reign of terror goes deeper, as he would find Union sympathizers and make them pay dearly. In one case, he traveled to the house of a very wealthy Union sympathizer, beat him badly, then proceeded to rape his 12-year-old black servant. Dude was just kind of dark, man. He was specifically angry at the man because he freed his slaves recently. Anderson then proceeded to trample him with a horse. His men then went on to rape several female servants in the household as well. Finally, Union leaders would summon Samuel P. Cox. His primary goal? Eliminate Bloody Bill. Cox would be assigned highly experienced troops, luckily, and they eventually tracked down Bill, triggering the skirmish at Albany, Missouri battle. At one point, Bloody Bill and the son of a Confederate general charged the Union lines alone for some reason, and a bullet caught Bill behind the ear, killing him instantly. Union soldiers would take the body of William Anderson and parade it around town, then display it at a local courthouse for public viewing. Soldiers are reportedly found string in his pocket with 53 knots. Apparently this signified how many people he killed. Union soldiers cut off his fingers because they wanted his rings, then buried him in a random field. Years later, though, a man named Cole Younger retrieved the body of Bloody Bill and reburied him in an old Pioneer Cemetery in Richmond, Missouri. Most of you might recognize that name, Cole Younger. That's because he was part of the famous American outlaw James Younger gang. Oddly enough, various resources online refer to Bloody Bill as an American hero in history, so I leave it to your own judgment, of course. Hopefully you can see the symbol at the top of the headstone. If not, I'll put a pic in the video. Stop by the headstone of Alonzo. I couldn't find a straight answer to that headstone symbol of a tent or some type of caravan tent. At first I read that it might be related to the Bible and Abraham being visited by 3 men, which I guess were angels. Another posting I found describes tent symbolizing that all life is temporary and we are on the pilgrimage to the grave. Maybe one of you knows the true meaning, but I thought I'd share a rare symbol found in my journeys. Alrighty, time for the tour. Not a big one. There is a bigger one across the street. I think it's called Sacred Heart or something. Tiny loud by this cemetery because it's right next to a busy road. Not too bad. I don't know what that says. 1NRI or INRI? One of you knows what that means. Discover something new. Looks like there might have been vandalism here at one point. Some of the headstones are like snapped in half. Does have a lot of symbolism as well. I thought that was kind of neat. About the Thornberry stories. More Masonic symbols. You will find some Civil War veterans here, but didn't find anything too interesting attached to the regiments. Cutsforth was a pretty popular name in this cemetery. That's a pretty cool one. Looks like it was just clean. Like Mother Nature's trying to take over some of these guys. And our friend, the blackberry. seeing any names or anything. I'm sure it's documented somewhere. Blackberries are trying to take these guys over too. So this one's one of the more peaceful ones. It is kind of out in the country, outside the town. Gervais. I think I'm saying that right. I wanted to say Gervais at first, but I'm pretty sure it's Gervais. At least a local newscasting article I found said that, so I'm going to stick with that. Anywho, look at these two monsters. Hope you enjoyed this little visit. A little bit of a dark visit with the Civil War stories, but that's part of 1800 history. If you have any other recommendations for cemeteries to visit in Oregon, feel free to comment below. Hope you're doing good, and thank you for watching. Have a good one.